Chapter 9. Alliances. The chamber felt smaller now, as if the very walls were pressing in with the weight of what they'd done. Glasstaff's body lay crumpled on the flagstones, his head several feet away. Blood dripped steadily from Doreen's blade, each crimson drop marking time in the deathly silence. Ilara's chest heaved as he stood over the corpse, his twin swords trembling in white-knuckled grips. Zyra found herself backing away until her shoulders met cold stone. Her carefully maintained composure threatened to crack as she watched her companions, people she'd begun to trust, wrestle with the aftermath of such brutal violence. The urge to demand answers burned in her throat, but for once the silver-tongued sorceress found herself speechless. Morthal's weathered features tightened as he struggled to maintain his composure.
We've lost our only source of information.
Doreen wiped her blade clean on Glasstaff's robes.
He tried to enthrall me.
She spat, her street-hardened facade masking any hint of dishonesty.
I won't apologize for defending myself. Way I see it, one less snake in the grass.
Death is not enough,
Ilara whispered, his soft voice carrying the weight of personal torment.
Evil must be destroyed.
His words hung in the air like poison, and he turned away, hiding the shadow that crossed his face. Morthal exhaled heavily and knelt beside Glasstaff's corpse. His movements were deliberate as he searched through blood-stained robes, eventually producing a crumpled letter marked with a spider-like emblem. The parchment crinkled loudly in the suffocating stillness of the chamber.
Lord Arno Albric,
Morthal read aloud, his voice growing harder with each word.
Continue watching newcomers from Neverwinter. Capture them if you can, or kill them if you must. See that any dwarven maps in their possession are delivered to me immediately.
He paused, jaw clenching.
Signed, the Black Spider.
The cleric's armored fist clenched around the letter as realization dawned.
Arno Albric, Sildar's missing friend.
His voice cracked with the weight of betrayal.
By Helm's grace I hoped we would find him, but not like this.
The truth settled over them like a funeral shroud. Iarno Glasstaff had betrayed not just Phandalin, but the Lord's alliance. Now he lay dead at their feet, his secrets forever sealed behind lifeless lips, while somewhere in the shadows, the mysterious black spider continued to spin their web. Dust motes danced in the torchlight as they searched the chamber, each corner potentially hiding another piece of this deadly puzzle. Finally, a massive tome caught their attention, resting on a weathered oak shelf, its spine as thick as a blacksmith's anvil, the cover etched with ancient dwarven runes.
Well, ain't that a pretty paperweight?
Doreen drawled, lazily nudging the book with the toe of her leather boot. Her nose wrinkled as a cloud of dust puffed up from the ancient pages.
Looks heavier than my coin purse. Not exactly my style of loot.
A derisive snort escaped Zira as she adjusted her perfectly pressed robes.
Of course it isn't,
She replied, her cultured voice dripping with sarcasm.
I don't see any precious gems adorning the cover.
Despite her haughty words, she hesitated before finally tucking the massive tome into her pack. Next, their search led them to a chamber that drew an appreciative whistle from Doreen. Weapons lined the walls in neat rows, sword racks displaying blades of various makes, spear points gleaming in the flickering light. But it was the ornate weapons that caught the rogue's eye. Fine steel adorned with precious stones, craftsmanship that spoke of both beauty and deadliness.
Now these.
Doreen purred, her fingers dancing over gem-studded hilts with the practiced grace of a master thief.
These I can definitely carry.
She began stuffing weapons into a rough canvas sack, her movements quick and precise, years of pickpocketing evident in every efficient gesture. The satisfied smirk playing across her face spoke volumes about her priorities. Gold and gems would always outweigh wisdom and knowledge in her ledger. The distinct clink of metal on metal echoed through the chamber as she worked, drawing a disapproving glance from Morthal, though the cleric held his tongue. They had bigger concerns than Doreen's predictable avarice, and sometimes, he had learned, it was better to pick one's battles, especially with allies as unpredictable as these. Raucous laughter echoed through the corridor, spilling from behind a stout wooden door. Morthal, righteous fire blazing in his eyes, slammed it wide with theatrical flourish.
Glassstaff is dead.
His voice boomed with religious fervor.
Flee or die.
Apparently, his performance didn't have the effect he desired, as the three Redbrand ruffians lounging around a pair of prison cells merely stared at the sudden interruption. Their initial confusion quickly gave way to sneering amusement at this seemingly deranged priest. The scene before Morthal, however, did not infuse any humor. Two women huddled in one cell, their terror evident in every trembling movement. In the adjacent cage, a teenage boy pressed against the bars, tears cutting clean tracks down his dirt-stained face.
Leave my mother alone, please.
The raw desperation in the boy's voice cracked like a whip across their souls.
Don't hurt her anymore.
Something snapped inside Elara. The boy's plea echoed with haunting familiarity. Another child, another dungeon, another time when darkness had won. His hands tightened around his sword hilts as memories of his own family's screams merged with the present. Elara exploded through the doorway, his twin blades already in motion before the god could register the whisper of leather on stone. The elf's left sword swept upward in a glittering arc, drawing blood from hip to shoulder. In the same fluid movement, Elara's right blade traced a perfect crescent, silver light dancing along its edge as it found the gap between leather strips at the guard's thigh. As the man's knee buckled, Elara launched into a graceful pirouette, his body rotating through the air with deadly precision. Both swords crossed like shears of torchlight, and the guard's next breath became his last. Without breaking momentum, Elara's spin carried him full circle, his grip shifting mid-rotation to reverse his hold on the right blade. His boots barely touched the stone when he drove the sword through leather and flesh with mechanical efficiency. The guard crumpled, his fingers still grasping for a sword he'd never had time to draw. The entire dance of death had lasted mere heartbeats, executed with the cold perfection of long practice. Zyra followed, fueled by compassion for the boy and a deep hatred for the men who imprisoned and harmed innocent women and children. She fixed them with a burning glare as flames erupted from her palms. Yet unlike before, this wasn't an uncontrolled storm of fury. This time she felt calm and control when the flames emerged. Time seemed to slow and voices faded away, each flicker of fire moving at her command, spiraling around the remaining guards in a deadly, precise dance. For the first time, she was able to feel the flames pulsing through her veins, and with it, a question coiled in her mind. Am I mastering this power, or is it mastering me? The searing strength at her fingertips had never felt so intimately hers. The guards' screams pulled her back to reality as they Frenched to extinguish their burning clothes. An arrow whistled past her ear, Doreen's contribution, finding its mark in one guard's chest with deadly accuracy. The last Redbrand, faced with the carnage of his companions, threw down his weapon and fell to his knees.
I surrender!
He wailed, all pretense of toughness evaporating.
No more! Please, no more!
Morthal moved with practiced precision, his expression stern as he secured the surrendered Redbrand.
By Helm's authority,
He intoned, the manacles clicking shut.
you'll face justice for your crimes.
The prisoner whimpered, but Morthal's attention had already shifted to ensuring the restraints were properly secured. Zira used the key they had found earlier, her usual graceful composure softening as she approached the cells.
You're safe now.
Zira said, her cultured voice gentling to a soothing whisper as she worked the lock. The familiar need to appear powerful and intimidating melted away in the face of such raw fear.
We were sent by Sildar Hallwinter. No one will harm you any more.
The cell door creaked open, and Myrna drew her daughter closer, her body trembling but her eyes fierce with maternal protection.
Thank you.
She managed, backing away slightly.
Please, just don't hurt my children. We'll do whatever you want.
Something twisted in Zira's chest at those words. For once, her carefully maintained facade gave way for genuine compassion.
You have my word.
She promised, kneeling beside a battered trunk she'd spotted.
Here, let's find your clothes. You must be freezing.
As she helped sort through the meager belongings, Zira found herself speaking softly, almost maternally, a tone that would have surprised even her closest associates.
My name is Zira. The priest over there is Morthal. And while he may sound stern, he serves Helm, the god of protection. You're truly safe with us.
Her fingers brushed against an older child's worn dress.
Is this yours?
The young woman nodded timidly, and Zira handed it to her with a warm smile, positioning herself to block the view of the guards' bodies. Behind her, she could still sense Ilara's barely contained rage, his weapons now sheathed, but his hands still clenching and unclenching rhythmically.
We'll get you back to town,
she continued, helping Myrna wrap a shawl around her shoulders.
There's hot food and warm beds waiting, and I promise you,
she added, meeting Myrna's eyes with unexpected fierceness,
these men will never trouble you again.
As they backtracked through the large natural cavern they'd passed earlier, Zira found herself drawn once again to the ravine below. She'd noticed something odd during their first crossing, but now the sensation was impossible to ignore. A peculiar coldness radiated from the depths. It was like a calling. There was something she needed to see. She halted mid-bridge.
Something's down there,
she announced, her refined voice tight with tension.
Something unknown. I felt it before, but now it's stronger.
Morthal's weathered face creased with concern.
We should leave,
he advised, his preacher's tone gentler than usual.
You've done enough.
Zira squared her shoulders, fighting both her fear and the memory of Morthal's earlier discovery of her draconic nature.
No. Help me down, please. I need to see what's calling to me.
Oh, brilliant,
Balin muttered from behind, taking a long pull from his flask.
Descending into a mysterious dark pit is exactly how you want to spend your time.
With Morthal's reluctant assistance, she descended the rough slope. The stench of decay hit her full force at the bottom, and a bleached skeleton sprawled across the stones drew a sharp cry from her throat.
Zira, are you hurt?
Morthal's voice echoed with genuine worry.
I'm fine,
she managed, forcing steady confidence into her voice.
Lovely decor,
Balin called down, securing his flask.
Really brings the whole certain death motif together, doesn't it?
Zira's trembling fingers found a small unicorn pendant around the skeleton's neck, which she carefully removed. A partially concealed chest caught her eye. Inside lay coins and an eagle-hilted sword, but what truly captured her attention were 5 gleaming green gems. As her fingers closed around one of the malachites, something clicked in her mind. The sensation reminded her of the newfound control she'd experienced with her flames, but different. These stones weren't quite right, too impure, too earthen, but they sparked an understanding she'd never had before.
If only,
she whispered, turning the stone in the dim light, watching how it caught and held the glow.
A clearer crystal, a diamond.
These crude stones were like a key, unlocking secrets about her power she'd never considered. With purer gems, proper crystals,
Zyra.
Morthal's voice broke through her reverie, genuine concern cracking his usual commanding tone.
We need to move.
Startled from her contemplation, she quickly secured the chest's contents in her bag, mind still racing with newfound possibilities. As she climbed back up, she clutched the malachites tight, knowing that while these stones weren't the answer themselves, they had shown her a path. The twilight painted Phandolin's streets in deepening shadows as they escorted Myrna and her children toward the Stonehill Inn. When Myrna cast a longing glance down the street toward her home, Zira placed a gentle hand on her shoulder.
Please, not tonight.
Zyra urged, her cultured voice soft with genuine concern.
Come with us to the inn. There could still be red brands lurking in the shadows.
Indeed.
Morthal added with his characteristic priestly gravity.
Only the ghost of your dead husband awaits you at home.
The words hung in the air like a dropped plate in a silent tavern. In that precise moment, through either divine intervention or cosmic coincidence, both Zira and Doreen found the exact same gaps in Morthal's supposedly impenetrable armor. Their elbows struck simultaneously, one from each side, hitting those particularly tender spots between the backplate and breastplate that even the most skilled armorsmiths can't quite protect. The mighty cleric of Helm let out a yelp like a little girl, stumbling sideways with eyes as wide as copper pieces. He glanced between the two women in bewildered shock, as if unable to comprehend how his divinely blessed armor had failed him so spectacularly.
Gods above, Morthal.
Doreen growled, rubbing her elbow.
Think before you speak. Even I know better than that. And I rob people for a living.
Doreen's eyes widened as she realized her slip. She flailed for words, her voice rising slightly in panic.
I mean rob as in, metaphorically. Like, robbing them of their boredom. With my, charming personality. Yes, that's it.
Morthal raised an eyebrow.
Charming.
He deadpanned.
Your diplomatic skills, Morthal,
Zira added, massaging her own smarting arm.
are about as refined as a troll's table manners.
Lara stepped forward while Morthal was still trying to reconcile being outmaneuvered by his own armor. The elf's quiet voice carried the weight of shared suffering as he addressed Myrna.
I know your pain. We'll get revenge on all of them. You have my word.
Myrna nodded, tears welling in her eyes, while Morthal continued to shift his armor plates, muttering something about Helm's protection apparently having gaps he'd need to address. The subtle clink of his adjustments provided an oddly appropriate accompaniment to their solemn procession toward the inn. Their final stop of the night was the town hall, where, to their relief, they found Sildar working late. He hunched over documents in the lamplight, his weathered face crumpled as he read the black spider's letter, grief etching deeper lines around his eyes.
Yarno,
Sildar's voice thickened with emotion.
I never imagined. My friend betraying the Alliance.
He placed the letter down with trembling fingers.
You did the right thing, though I wish he could have stood trial.
Despite his evident distress, Sildar honored his promise, counting gold coins which Morthal then distributed among the group. Zyra quietly added the coin purse from the ravine to the pool, her mind still dwelling on the malachites hidden in her sleeve. Doreen hesitated before adding the purse they had found in Yarno's chamber, the one Morthal had handed her to carry. Her expression soured as she loosened the strings, the coins jingling faintly as she placed them on the pile. She didn't bother hiding her displeasure. It was clear she resented parting with such a significant sum. Her gaze lingered on the gold, a flicker of frustration passing over her face before she stepped back, crossing her arms tightly. Zyra watched her carefully, unease stirring in her chest. Doreen had changed. The shift had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first, but now it was undeniable. Since they left Neverwinter, the once cheerful and determined woman seemed colder, more calculative, and angrier with each passing day. Zyra wondered what lay beneath the surface of Doreen's growing bitterness, and whether it was something that could ever be undone. After others had departed to the inn, Sildar retrieved a crystal decanter of amber spirits, pouring 2 generous measures. The liquid caught the lamplight like gold as he handed one to Morthal.
The Lord's Alliance needs men of principle.
Sildar began, studying Morthal over his glass.
I've watched how you lead your colorful band of companions. You maintain your moral compass, despite their, shall we say, varied ethical standards.
Morthal's lips twitched slightly.
They are skilled allies, but yes, their hearts often require guidance. Helm teaches us to protect the weak, not profit from them.
Precisely.
Sildar nodded approvingly.
You bear Helm's conviction, and you've proven your bravery. More importantly, you understand the difference between necessary compromise and moral corruption. A rare quality in these troubled times.
Morthal swirled the spirits in his glass, his expression thoughtful.
I've been considering my path forward,
he admitted.
These lands cry out for protection, for order. The red brands were just one symptom of a deeper rot.
Then perhaps it's time to take a more official stand,
Sildar suggested.
The Lord's Alliance could use a man like you. We need those who can navigate the gray areas of the world while keeping their moral center intact.
Morthal stood, walking to the window. The streets of Phandalin lay quiet below, peaceful now, but for how long? He'd seen too much evil flourish in shadows while good men stood idle.
I accept,
he finally declared, turning back to Sildar with renewed purpose.
I cannot stand by while evil slithers through these lands. I will serve as Helm guides me, and perhaps guide others toward the light as well.
They clasped hands firmly, and Morthal departed into the night, his new title, Cloak of the Lord's Alliance, settling upon his shoulders like his god's blessing. Perhaps, he thought, this was Helm's plan all along, to place him where he could do the most good, even if his companions weren't quite ready for such a righteous path. The Stonehill Inn settled into an exhausted quiet as night deepened. Doreen disappeared upstairs, leaving a trail of soot and blood droplets that marked her path to a much-needed bath. In a shadowed corner of the dining hall, Ilara sat alone, turning a small object over and over in his trembling hands. The porcelain doll head caught the firelight, its painted eyes staring back at him with an innocence that twisted like a knife in his gut. His sister's toy, salvaged from the ashes of his mistakes. The weight of it seemed heavier tonight after seeing another family torn apart by violence. Across the room, Balin methodically emptied tankard after tankard, as if trying to wash away the memory of steel meeting flesh. The barkeep had long since left the pitcher within easy reach, recognizing a man drinking to forget. Zyra's heart still raced with the evening's revelations, about both the corruption they'd uncovered and her own emerging powers. Yet, as she watched Myrna and her children picking listlessly at bowls of steaming stew, her personal concerns seemed to dim. She moved to their table with careful grace, settling beside them with uncharacteristic humility.
I'm so sorry we couldn't save your husband,
she offered, her usually pristine diction softening with genuine emotion.
Truly, if there's ever anything more I can do...
The words felt inadequate, but she pressed on. Myrna looked up, her face a map of grief lined with exhaustion. Yet something flickered in her eyes, a spark of life not quite extinguished.
Thank you,
she whispered, drawing her children closer.
You saved my children. Nothing means more than that.
Zyra's fingers brushed the pouch of gemstones in her sleeve. She'd been studying them earlier, sensing their magical potential, but now She slid them across the rough wooden table, her voice dropping to ensure privacy.
These were glass tufts.
She explained softly.
After all you've endured, they belong to you now. Please, take them.
Tears spilled down Myrna's cheeks as she clutched the pouch, perhaps feeling its weight as a small measure of justice. Zira squeezed her hand once, then withdrew quietly, her own chest tight with competing emotions. She understood too well the pain of losing family, of having one's world shattered. Yet, unlike Myrna, she still carried her burden in secret. The scales beneath her cloths a constant reminder of her own hidden truths. The inn had settled into midnight silence when Zira sat cross-legged on her bed, Glasstaff's ornate staff balanced across her knees. Her fingers traced the intricate carvings until they reached the crystal mounted at its apex. The gem seemed to pulse with dormant energy, responding to her touch in ways that made her draconic blood sing.
What's so fascinating about that stick?
Doreen's drawl cut through her concentration. The rogue lay sprawled across her bed, still toweling her damp hair. Zyra's hands stilled on the crystal, though her fingers remained in contact with its smooth surface.
It's not just a stick,
she replied carefully.
It's like a lens for energy, a focus point.
She could feel it even now, the way the crystal seemed to gather and direct power, like sunlight through glass. With proper attunement, she suspected she could channel pure defensive energy through it, creating shields of raw force. Her thoughts drifted to the malachites she'd given away, remembering how even those crude stones had helped her understand her innate powers. A properly cut diamond, though. With that, she could control her wild flames in totally new ways, to shape and direct them with the same clarity as the crystal in her hands.
Speaking of magical items,
Doreen ventured, trying to sound casual.
Mind if I take a look at that fancy sword we found?
Zyra hesitated, then handed over the jeweled blade. As Doreen's fingers closed around the hilt, a subtle warmth spread up her arm.
That's different,
she muttered, settling onto her own bed to examine it closer. The sensation grew stronger, a tingling that raced through her entire body like lightning in slow motion. Her vision blurred, the sword's glow becoming hypnotic, and she slumped backwards. In her dreams, Doreen flew through corridors of pure magic, arcane forces swirling around her like living ribbons of light. The sword sang to her in languages she shouldn't understand, but somehow did, promising powers beyond mere steel and shadow. When she finally stirred hours later, the sword still clutched to her chest. She couldn't quite remember the dreams, but her fingers tingled with newfound potential. Morning arrived with the steady drumbeat of boots in the corridor. The adventurers gathered in Morthal's cramped chamber, all except Balin, who was presumably nursing his ale-induced regrets. They clustered around a makeshift command table, where Doreen, still blinking away strange dreams, had placed the ornate sword. Morthal lifted the blade with reverent care, his eyes widening as he took in its masterful craftsmanship. The silver-chased scabbard gleamed in the morning light, but it was the hilt that drew everyone's attention, an exquisitely worked eagle with wings spread wide, every feather rendered in perfect detail.
Remarkable,
he breathed, turning the blade to catch the light.
My colleague Lord Hallwinter recognized this sword. This is Talon, the legendary blade of Sir Aldith Tressendar.
His fingers traced the name inscribed along the blade with something approaching awe.
A knight of unparalleled valor, whose legacy is woven into the very stones of Phandalin.
Doreen's lips parted, perhaps to share her strange experience with the weapon, but Morthal continued, caught up in his own reverence.
By the wisdom vested in me by the helm,
Morthal said while holding the sword in his hands,
I've decided to carry this sword myself. A powerful relic deserves a worthy bearer,
he declared, sliding the blade into his silver-lined belt with practiced dignity. He offered Doreen a perfunctory nod for her assistance in identifying the blade's properties, then straightened his shoulders, assuming his familiar stance.
You see, this is precisely why we must maintain the highest moral standards. Sir Aldith was known not just for his martial prowess, but for his generosity to the common folk. He gave alms to the poor, never turning away a hungry child.
His voice took on that familiar sermon-like cadence.
We would do well to follow his example. Just yesterday, I saw several of you spending coin at the tavern. Perhaps if you would give more freely from your—
Fascinating lecture.
Doreen cut in dryly, pushing herself up from her seat, followed by Zira.
But I believe I hear someone in desperate need of my attention. Somewhere else.
They slipped away before Morthal could launch into another homily about charitable giving. The common room buzzed with nervous energy as villagers clustered around tables, their morning meals forgotten. Word of last night's events had spread like wildfire, and they hungered for confirmation of their hopes or their fears. Zira descended the stairs with calculated grace, pushing aside her wounded pride from upstairs. Her boots clicked against each step in perfect rhythm, Glassstaff's crystal catching the morning light. She'd learned long ago that appearance was everything, and right now these people needed a show of strength. She strode to the center of the room, allowing the crystal staff to tap the floorboards 3 times, just enough to command attention. The murmuring crowd fell silent, all eyes drawn to her commanding presence.
Hear me.
Her voice carried to every corner, cultured tones ringing with authority.
Your town is safe from the Red Brands. They've fled or been chained.
She paused, letting the words sink in before adding,
Phandalin is under Morthal's protection now. Any who threaten this peace will answer to him and the Lord's alliance.
Relief washed through the room in a tangible wave. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then building as the reality of freedom took hold. From her position near the bar, Doreen watched the performance with amused appreciation, absently running her thumb along her belt where Talon should have been.
Nice speech.
She muttered under her breath, snagging an abandoned mug of ale.
Let His Holiness play the hero if he wants. Some of us prefer working in the shadows anyway.
Her free hand unconsciously drifted to where that strange tingling sensation still lingered from her encounter with the sword, a reminder that she had her own mysteries to pursue. Doreen entered Halia Thornton's office with deliberate confidence, noting how the merchant's eyes sparked with interest. Without ceremony, Halia produced an ornate decanter and 2 crystal glasses.
To success.
Halia proposed, pouring a wine that smelled of distant shores and deep pockets.
I hear Glassstaff met a swift end.
Consider it handled.
Doreen replied with a sly grin, appreciating both the vintage and the implications of this meeting. They shared a knowing look over their glasses. After a calculated pause, Halia drew something from her desk, a small pin bearing the image of a dragon, its detail exquisite.
The Gentarum,
Halia began, her voice rich with promise,
understands that power flows like water, finding every crack, every opportunity. We don't waste time with moral posturing or noble ideals. We deal in reality.
Doreen turned the pin over in her fingers.
Pretty words, but what's the real offer?
Freedom.
Halia replied.
Freedom from the constraints of law and custom. The Gentarum is family, one that rewards ambition rather than stifling it. We watch out for our own.
Family can be complicated,
Doreen observed, thinking of her own past.
Indeed. But unlike conventional families, we believe you are the master of your own destiny. Never be less than what you deserve to be.
Halia refilled their glasses.
Everything has a price, Doreen. Everyone can be bought. The trick is knowing the currency they prefer.
And what currency are you offering?
magical items for those who appreciate power, gold for those who understand its true worth, influence for those clever enough to wield it.
Halia's smile sharpened.
Wave Echo Cave has drawn many eyes. Stay close to Morthal and Sildar. Keep me informed of their movements, their plans. The rewards will be substantial.
And if I refuse?
Then you return the pin. We finish our wine and part as friends. But,
Halia added,
I think you understand opportunity when you see it. The Lord's Alliance plays at maintaining order. The Gentarim? We shape reality to our will.
Doreen studied the pin once more, remembering the tingling power she'd felt from Talon. Power that Morthal had simply claimed as his divine right. Perhaps it was time to seize some power of her own. She slipped the pin into her pouch, drained her glass, and stood.
To shaping reality, then.
As Doreen left, she felt the weight of the pin against her hip, lighter than Talon had been, but somehow just as significant. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't stealing a sword, but playing a longer game. Zira found Mayor Harbin exactly as she expected, hunched behind his desk, dabbing nervous sweat from his forehead with an embroidered handkerchief. She swept into the office with practiced grace, summoning her most winning smile despite her instinctive distaste for the man's fawning manner.
Such a bustling town hall you keep,
she began, her voice honey-sweet as she perched elegantly on the edge of his desk.
I've heard such interesting things about your connections to Neverwinter.
She paused, letting the implied flattery sink in.
I find myself in need of a particular gem. A diamond, to be precise. One of exceptional clarity.
Harbin's small eyes brightened with unmistakable avarice.
Ah, a diamond?
He practically purred the word.
Indeed, my lady, I do maintain certain valuable relationships with Neverwinter's finest merchants.
He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially.
For the right price, say 130 gold pieces, I could arrange something quite special.
The figure hit Zira like a physical blow, though she maintained her composed expression. The gems she'd given to Myrna would have covered it easily. For a moment she felt the sharp bite of regret. But then she remembered the widow's tears of gratitude, the way her children had finally smiled. The warmth of that memory pushed back against her darker instincts.
I must consider the expense,
she replied smoothly, rising with fluid grace.
I'll let you know.
Harbin bobbed his head like an eager puppet, clearly pleased with himself as she departed. Outside, Zira paused in the morning sunshine, letting the crisp air fill her lungs. In one hand, she gripped Glasstaff's staff, feeling the crystal's resonance with her inherited power. In the other, she weighed her coin purse. The contrast felt oddly symbolic. The simple act of helping Myrna had awakened something inside her, a warmth that seemed to ease the constant tension of maintaining her carefully crafted facade. Yet the morning's bitter taste lingered. Morthal's dismissive attitude, the constant fear of her scales being discovered, the exhausting effort of appearing flawless and untouchable, it all weighed on her. She traced a finger along the staff's crystal, remembering how it had responded to her touch. Perhaps true power wasn't about appearing invincible, but about finding the strength to be vulnerable.
Silent battles rage beneath my skin, while pride and fear fight for who will win. In the shadows of our broken parts, we find the strength to share our hearts. Reaching out with trembling hands to you, share our hearts.
Bah! Too many feelings. Let's get a proper drinking song going before my beard gets all soggy.
Morthal lift his tankard high. Cheers to Helm and to the sky. Can you heal our wounds when things go awry? And Byland, he just grunts and drains it dry. Down the ale and raise your cup. Adventure calls, so drink it up. Heroes bold and stories old. Another round before we go. Cyrus stands with a daring glare, casting spells with style and flair. She'll charm you quick if you dare to stare. And Byland, he just snores in his chair. Down the ale and raise your cup. Adventure calls, so drink it up. Heroes bold and stories old. Another round before we go. Doreen smirks as she picks a lock. Finds the treasures others block. Keeps the best, but shares her luck. And Byland, he just lost his favorite rock. Down the ale and raise your cup. Adventure calls, so drink it up. Heroes bold and stories old. Another round before we go. Alara drinks beneath the stars, healing wounds and ancient scars. Found his home in smoky bars. And Byland, he's still searching for his jars. Down the ale and raise your cup. Adventure calls, so drink it up. Heroes bold and stories old. Another round before we go. Some will never bring of joys, another bring to says. Well, your breeze but grave of drays, and the falser for some lanes.
You have been listening to Shadows of Neverwinter Book 1, following the adventures of Morthal, Zyra, Doreen, Ilara, and Balin. Their story continues in Book 2. If you enjoyed this tale from the Sword Coast, please visit Arbathur's Adventures on YouTube and show your support with a like. Thank you for listening.